There's a great guy out there. He's always been very supportive of what I do and of what most people do. He runs a great website called Instapundit. Actually, he founded it, as far as I know. He's a professor of law, too, and his name is Glenn Harlan Reynolds. Glenn, how are you, my friend?
Great to be here. Great to hear your voice.
It's a pleasure. You've written this magnificent book called The New School, and I just want my audience to know, I thought we'd talk about something a little different, but that is immensely important. First of all, why did you write this book, and generally, what's this book about?
I basically fell into it. I wrote a column about 4 or 5 years ago for the Washington Examiner on the higher education bubble, and it got a huge reaction, so I sort of started following that, and then I wrote a follow-up piece called The K-12 Implosion, and I got a lot of reaction to that, so I started paying attention, and then I wrote a couple of little short broadsides for Encounter Books and on those two topics, and they did really well. So Roger Kimball, the publisher, said, why don't you put those together and do a full-length book on this? And so the next thing I knew, there I am. The basic gist is really everywhere from kindergarten to graduate school, the problem with our system of education is that it costs too much and it delivers too little. And that problem has actually gotten worse over time because the costs keep going up, whereas what it delivers, if anything, has been going down. So we've kind of reached a breaking point at both levels. At K-12, you're seeing big urban school systems imploding because parents are just taking their kids out, and they're literally laying off teachers and closing schools. At higher education, something sort of like that is happening. People just aren't willing to take out the student loan debt anymore that they used to be because they don't see the payoff. And you're actually seeing colleges cutting tuition, having their credit ratings reduced, laying off faculty members and the like. And it's just, well, I use Herb Stein's law, something that can't go on forever won't. We've reached the point, sort of at all phases of education, where things can't go on the way they have been anymore, so they won't.
Let's focus a little on this K-12 system, which is basically a public school system. How was this devised in the first place?
Well, it's an interesting story because, at the time of the American Revolution even, we really didn't have anything you could call a public education system, but Americans were remarkably well educated. We were probably the most literate country on the planet, which is one reason why Thomas Paine's pamphlets like Common Sense had so much impact. Later on, though, people who saw themselves as social reformers didn't like that, and they also wanted to take some of the power away from the churches, who did a lot of the educating. One of them was Horace Mann, who was the secretary to the Massachusetts Board of Education. His motto was, "Men are cast iron, but children are wax." And he went to Europe and toured various models, loved the Prussian model, which was specifically designed to indoctrinate students and make them loyal servants of the state. And he basically copied that and brought it back to the United States and fought a while. Some people opposed him. They said it was kind of un-American. They said, the Prussian model is based on the idea that the government knows more than the people, and the American system is based on the idea that the people know more than the government. But he basically won, and we basically still have Horace Mann's model today, except probably somewhat less rigorous. I should note, though, that Horace Mann's own kids were homeschooled.
Mm-hmm. So the idea was to train people to be obedient, correct?
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. But you say this is at some point going to come to an end, and your emphasis is on, among other things, technology. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, there were two things going on. I mean, public education is kind of in a scissors problem because, on the one hand, it's pushing people out because the schools are just getting worse. And on the other hand, people are being pulled out because the alternatives are much more attractive. Just a personal example, my daughter started in 9th grade at the local public high school, and it's considered one of the better high schools in the state. But after she'd been there for a few weeks, she came home and said, "I'd like to go to online school." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, I've kept track of everything we did today, and I was there for 8 hours. Only 2.5 hours of what we did was actually school. The rest was all just time-wasting stuff like DARE lectures and pep rallies and all that sort of thing." And so she did. She actually went to Kaplan's online college prep school, and she could take a bunch of AP courses that weren't offered here, and she graduated at 16 and went off to college early. And it was a good experience. And it also, because it was flexible, let her work during the day at a real job around real people instead of hanging out in a warehouse full of sullen teenagers, which I think was an improvement.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's the future?
I think it's one of the futures. I mean, one of the things I say in the book is that there's not a new single model to replace sort of the old single model. What there are instead is a whole lot of different models that are right for different kids. I mean, some kids will do well online. Some kids may do better in a traditional classroom. In fact, maybe a more traditional classroom than you find at most public schools now. Some kids may do better in a Montessori-type approach or being homeschooled, or, there's just a lot of different approaches. And the nice thing is, I think actually Kevin Williamson originally said this, but look, we've got 900 kinds of shampoo now. Why would we only have one kind of school?
Mm-hmm. It's true. And we require competition for making toasters, but we don't require competition for schools, do we?
No, we actually seem to treat it like it's somewhat suspicious.
Now, you graduate 12th grade, you think you're ready for college, and then what happens?
Well, college is another story. I mean, one of the funny things that's happened to college in the last several decades is it's become a status marker more than anything else. People go to college a lot of times not so much because there's anything in particular they want to learn there, or even anything in particular they actually do learn there, but because they just don't want to be thought of as people who never went to college. And the problem with that is, back when you could pay your way through college by waiting tables, it wasn't so bad, maybe, and you could study what interested you, and maybe be sort of broadening. But now it's a six-figure investment, and sometimes you get something out of it, but sometimes you don't. I mean, we talk about college as something that's going to remedy income inequality, but in fact, all the studies indicate that it doesn't. Even Paul Krugman's admitted that. In fact, it makes some students worse off. They get involved in what sociologists call the party pathway and wind up worse off than if they'd never gone to college. For some of them, they develop problems with drinking or drugs or sex that plague them for years. And sometimes all they get is just a worthless degree and a lot of debt, and that's not so great either. So, we say go to college, you'll make more money, but those figures are skewed upward by the people who study industrial engineering. If you're one of the people who studies women's studies, you're probably not going to earn more because you went to college.
The book is The New School. I'm talking to its author, Professor Glenn Reynolds. Glenn, what's going to happen to higher education, and how do we bring down the costs?
Well, what's happening now is colleges are beginning to cut tuitions. We're seeing a number of them have cut tuitions, some pretty drastically. A lot more are offering sort of under-the-table discounts and college.
Why is it so expensive in the first place?
Well, one of the biggest reasons college has gotten more expensive is because of administrators. The number of administrators in schools has vastly increased, while actually the number of faculty has stayed fairly flat. And most schools now have more administrators than they have faculty members, some significantly more. And that means that you're just paying a lot of drones. And, most of these administrators, some of them do good work, but an awful lot of them, if they disappeared tomorrow, nobody would know. Nobody can even tell you what they do now. There's a terrific book called The Fall of the Faculty about this by a professor at Johns Hopkins who goes into all the stuff administrators do and how little it has to do with actually running a university. So that's one thing. They're going to actually wind up reducing the number of people there. There are now online courses that are much cheaper. At higher education, Georgia Tech, for example, is offering a master's in computer science online for $7,000. It costs closer to $50,000 if you actually go on their campus. You'll see more of that. And universities are just going to be pressed to do something they've never bothered to do, which is to actually try to cut costs and focus the money they spend on things that actually make a difference.
But will it happen fast enough? There's this big bubble, isn't there, that's ready to, at some point, explode?
There is, and actually I think it will, because it's funny, I shipped the manuscript for the book off to the publisher in June, and then I was following the news, and I kept seeing stuff I'd predicted already happening, like schools having their credit ratings cut, and I was like, no, not yet, not until the book comes out.
Yeah, wait. Yeah.
It seems to be happening quickly, and it kind of reminds me of that line in The Great Gatsby about how you go bankrupt, which is very slowly and then all at once. And I think what's happening is we've had sort of slow change for a while where people sort of knew there was a problem but not much happened. Now I think a lot of schools are kind of up against it, and they're having to really look at what they're doing. And I think in the next 5 years you're going to see very dramatic change.
This is Professor Glenn Reynolds. The book is The New School. You can get it anywhere, particularly Amazon.com. You can get it on my social sites where we just posted it. Now, Glenn Reynolds, you also run a fabulously successful website called Instapundit, instapundit.com. Did you start that website?
I did. I started it in August of 2001, which is a long time ago now.
It really is. It's a go-to website for people who want some really intelligent information and links and so forth. And you're more libertarian than anything else. You're a law professor. What made you start that website?
I started it because I teach internet law, and I just was looking for something new and different to do on the internet. And I had read some of the very early blogs that were around then, Andrew Sullivan, Mickey Cass, Virginia Postrel, and I had been doing some web stuff using Dreamweaver, which was kind of a pain, and I ran across the blogger.com site, and it was just like, oh, you just log in, you type stuff, you hit publish, and bing, it appears on your blog. This is so easy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what got me going.
You're a busy guy, so you wrote this book, you teach in law school, and you run that website. How much of your time is spent on the website?
Sometimes I feel like I've got a DSL cable just wired into my brain, and probably one day something like that will happen.
And not only that, you're very generous with your time and so forth. For instance, when I ever write a book, you put it up there, you interview me, and you do that sort of thing. What is it that motivates you in that regard?
Well, I'm one of those people who always likes to introduce people to other people I think they ought to know. And that's just sort of what I do on the blog in a bigger way. I really like people to know about what's going on, and I like stuff that I like to get more attention. And so that's what I try to do.
Well, your book is terrific. It's easily digestible. It's in plain English. It's not one of these 800-page books. The book is The New School, How the Information Age Will Save American Education from Itself. It's really a fascinating book by my guest, Professor Glenn Reynolds. Well, Glenn, thank you, my friend. God bless you. Good luck.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, take care. It really is a good book. It's a very interesting book. And those of you who are concerned about what's going on in public education today and at the college level as well, this book gives you some hope, talks about what he feels is going to happen. Competition, the information age, all these things are going to make a huge difference, and that's a good thing.